Hi, this is Mike Fry, and you are listening to the We Fucking Told You So podcast. Today is January 31st, 2025, and today's installment is titled Of Sex and Gender. It's been less than 2 weeks and a fire hose of sewage. One simple issue exposes them all. One executive order on the first day helps explain the insanity of all of it. On his first day in office, Felon 47 signed a number of executive orders kicking off nearly 2 weeks of some of the most wildly crazy statements, decisions, threats, and worse to come out of the White House in our nation's history. There's been so much shit spewing from his mouth that it's been described as a fire hose of sewage. We think that might be putting it mildly. From threatening war with some of our key allies, to threatening to jail U.S. citizens in foreign prisons, to flying migrants to nations in military transports where the U.S. had no permission to land, to causing total chaos by illegally shutting down funding for a slew of federal programs, then reversing, then doubling down again and reversing back, to gutting the FAA and preventing the hiring of desperately needed air traffic controllers, and then blaming, quote, DEI for a resulting plane crash. We're out of breath, and those are just some of the highlights of the shit show that's been the first not quite 2 weeks. The shit show has been so voluminous and putrid that we cannot possibly cover all of it, not even the smallest little bit of it. We've therefore decided to focus on one short executive order signed on the first day that is illustrative of all of it. It reveals the total and complete lack of thought, understanding, education, and commitment to facts and science that drives this administration. Frankly, it seems that education and knowledge are treated as bad things by these intellectual simpletons. We're speaking of the executive order banning the recognition of more than 2 genders or sexes. We have to phrase it that way because the order continually misuses both words, which is a common thing for those who do not really understand either. For the record, we will define what they are before going any further. Sex is the term science uses to describe a person, plant, or animal's physical anatomy. Gender, on the other hand, is a person's internal, emotional, and spiritual construct as to the roles they play in family and society. In other words, sex is about physical characteristics, while gender is about internal feelings and thoughts based on artificial social constructs or stereotypes. To be clear, if those definitions are new to you, you shouldn't feel bad. Unless one has to make decisions about other people's sex or gender, they probably have little or no need to think too deeply about differences between sex and gender. On the other hand, anyone making government policy about either or both should have, at least, a cursory understanding of what they're talking about. Sadly, that isn't how the Felon 47 and his idiots he surrounds himself with do things. In his executive order on the topic, Hitler 2.0 decreed that the government would only recognize 2 sexes or genders, insisting they represented reality in science, except that anyone who passed high school biology understands that's not really true. In reality, neither sex nor gender are binary or black and white. Both are spectrums, and there's lots of shades of gray. Both are interesting, complex, and amazingly diverse. In the womb, we all begin life as female, with ovaries, vulva, labia, clitoris, and other female anatomy. As our bodies develop based on a variety of factors, including genetics, temperatures and hormones, some of us make more or less of a transition to becoming male. The ovaries become testes, the clitoris evolves into a penis, the labia form the scrotum, etc. Different people stop this evolution partway through the process, which helps explain people and animals, and even some plants that are intersex. It should be noted that the fact that the word intersex is even a word is proof enough that there are more than two sexes. Given that there are all kinds of forms of intersexism, it's clear that sex is, in no way, so simple as a binary black and white choice. Given that gender is, by definition, a person's internal interpretation of artificial social constructs, it is mind-numbingly crazy to think it could be defined by anyone other than the person whose gender identity is being discussed. To sex and gender, we can add sexual orientation, which is different still. It involves the sex or sexes to which a person is sexually attracted. Layer sex, gender, and orientation together, and it's easy to see that a person's identity and makeup is potentially a vast rainbow of interesting options that is fully expressed in the natural world, whether or not our policymakers want to acknowledge that reality. As wildly interesting and complex as all of that is, sex and gender get even more interesting than that. In other species, there are animals that are parthenogenic, meaning not requiring fertilization or capable of fertilizing themselves. There are animals that can change their sex during their lives, and there are animals whose sex is determined in large part by the temperature at which their embryos develop, which is not so much of a thing for warm-blooded bodies like humans, because our bodies set our incubation temperature of our offspring, but subtle temperature changes can still have some influence. It should not be too much to ask that our policymakers make at least a minimal effort to understand the subjects they are making policy about. Understanding sex and gender is important to understanding each other and the world around us, and has broader implications than one might think. For example, one of the threats currently facing some species on Earth is climate change, which is heating up the soil and changing the sex ratio of the population, affecting a variety of turtles and other egg-laying reptiles. But if our elected officials, or in this case, unelected officials, see the link in the description of this podcast, are too crazy or dumb or too intellectually lazy to engage the few brain cells they have in their heads to do even the tiniest bit of learning about the subjects they are making decisions about, then we are all in for a really rough ride ahead. Sadly, that seems to be right where we are, with an administration that is both ignorant and purposefully ill-informed, and also arrogant enough to think that they need not learn a goddamn fucking thing. Which leads us to say to anyone who voted for this shit show, we fucking told you so. You have been listening to the We Fucking Told You So podcast. Please like and subscribe and share on your social media. Thanks for listening.